Okay, the next chapter, what we have here is specialist cost and management accounting techniques. So under this, the traditional accounting system was more involved with accounting for the cost. The financial accounting records all the transactions that are measurable in terms of money. Cost accounting objective was to ascertain what is the cost per unit. So in this process of doing that, there were certain assumptions made, and the conventional, the traditional method of it was taking care of accounting for the cost. So cost per unit has to be ascertained, and then the later on the selling price per unit is determined. So that is that was the main objective behind that. But there are we're going to go through all of them. The specialist cost and management accounting techniques. Under that, we would be looking at ABC, target costing, then management account, environmental management accounting, life cycle costing, throughput accounting. So these are the things which we would be discussing here under this particular chapter. Did you ever do the cost sheet? Did you ever prepare a cost sheet? Did you get the chance to prepare a cost sheet?
No.
Okay. So how the costs are accounted in cost sheet? Fine, let's just look into. We'll go to a Word file and then take it forward. The cost sheet has a particular format. There is one classification of cost. Um, the classification based on identifiability. Without doing a cost sheet, teaching ABC is a task. Let's see. There are various types of various classification. The classification of cost has various categories. So how the costs are categorized, or how they are classified, and how they are grouped together. So one such classification talks about the costs which are identified as um, identified with the products or service is called as direct cost. The cost which is not identified with product or service is called as indirect cost. So one classification. Um, what is the meaning of identified with the cost object? Let's say, for example, we'll try to make it as simple as possible, try to understand what is the meaning of that. So let's say that there is a piece of table which is made of furniture item, table, right in front of me there is a table. So I'm taking this example. If a table has to be made, so per unit of the table which has to be made, we would see there are certain costs which are incurred. So the first one is wood cost. Wood has to be used. Then you list out what are the costs which are required to make this piece of table. Please mention. There's labor cost. The carpenter who can makes this table, the charges paid to the carpenter, labor cost. Then anything else? Please come out. Please. Okay. I will only give the examples: glue, varnish, paint, etc. There are certain things. Then we see that tools are required. The carpentry tools and equipment they are required. Okay. So there are certain other things like small bolts and nuts. Those things are used. Okay, all of them are used. These are all costs which are incurred to make one unit of a particular product. So to make it very simple, I just took this example. How much? What is the cost of wood, steel, the decorum layer, if there is anything, or some kind of a layer, some frame which is fitted to that glass frame, or anything for whatever is that. So all that is the cost of raw material. For one piece of a table, how much would be required can be assessed. What is the quantity? What is the cost of this material can be assessed. On that note, if you look into that, material like glue, varnish, paint are also required. So glue, varnish, paint, they are also material. But can we precisely understand what will be the cost of glue, varnish, paint, and anything like that which is used? It is not possible to identify that. See, there is one thing which is purchased and some of quantity which is consumed. But do we know how much is the cost, or do we ascertain is as how much is the cost of glue or varnish or paint or anything which is some spray, something like that? It is not possible to identify that. So if that identifiability is lacking, we call the one which is identified, we call it as direct cost. The one which does not have the identifiability, it cannot be identified with the with per unit of a product or service, we call that as indirect cost. So the classification based on elements, if we are talking about elements of cost, there are three elements of cost. One is material cost, then the next one is labor cost, and the third one is expenses cost. Material, labor, and expenses. These are the three things, three elements of cost which are incurred. Anything which is in the form of inventory material, the cost which is incurred is called as material cost. The cost which is paid to the workers to convert the raw material into finished goods is called as the labor. Anything which is not neither a material nor labor is called as an expense. Any other cost which is incurred. So each of them we see that they can be classified as direct and indirect. So material can be understood as direct material depending on the nature of cost which is incurred. So direct and indirect. And then labor also on a similar note, it can be classified as direct labor and indirect labor. Suppose a worker who's appointed to um, make these tables, per unit of a table, what are his charges? Let's say he is paid 500 to make one piece of a table. So um, his wages or the cost of labor is identified with every single unit. Let's say there is a cleaner there in the factory premises where the work is done. So some wages are paid to the cleaner, but cleaner's wages can be identified for every single piece of table made. What is the amount of his wages charged? Can we identify that? No, it's not possible to identify. Therefore, such a cost is called as indirect cost. Expenses also, we can categorize them as direct and indirect. So the grouping of all the direct costs, that is direct material, direct labor, and then we see direct expenses added together. We use the term as prime cost. So that uh, the format of it would first account for what is prime cost. Okay. After that, we have the category of all indirect costs, indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses added together. We call this to be as overheads. They called as overheads because there is no identifiability. So when there is no identifiability, then identifiability with the cost object. Cost object could be anything, any entity with which we can charge some cost. It could be per unit of a product, it could be a department, a division, a function of business like production, administration, selling, distribution. So it could be anything. With that, if there is a possibility of charging cost, we call that to be as um, cost object. So if any cost is identified with the cost object, we call it as direct cost. So direct material or direct labor or direct expenses. If it is not identified, we call it as indirect cost. Now we will not get into much details about this. So in the then what after we write the prime cost, I'm erasing this. If any one of you want to make a note of it, please make a note of it quickly. I'm going to erase the screen. Okay, let's continue. I'm erasing this one. So the format after the prime cost, it has to account for all the indirect costs. But then indirect costs are not accounted in the order of indirect material, indirect labor, indirect expenses. But now the overhead costs are accounted based on the functions of business. What are the functions of business? First one is production, then administration, and selling and distribution. So in the same order, they would be accounted. So here we have add factory or production overheads. After that, so this is called as works cost. Of course, the elaborate one looks little different with adjustments of opening and closing stock of inventories. Right now, I'm not accounting for all those things. I'm just trying to give you a picture of how the cost sheet looks like. Okay, add administrative overheads. So this is called as cost of production. Then we have add selling and distribution overheads. And this is called as cost of goods sold. Okay, fine. Then we have when then we add profit and then becomes sales. This is the format in which the cost sheet is prepared. So now let's look into what are factory overheads. Factory overheads are those costs which are incurred in the factory, but they cannot be identified with the per unit of a product. So Some of the examples we just now saw, that indirect material, indirect labor, these are examples. So in a factory, the indirect costs incurred are factory rent. I'm just giving you a few examples: factory rent, supervisor salary, cleaning, power, fuel, water, coal, gas, then welfare charges, power, electricity charges, depreciation of assets. There are n number of items, the many items which are incurred. So then they are not identified with per unit. Maybe there are three products produced. So electricity cost is incurred for all three of them, all three products. Let's say that there are 10 supervisors taking care of the production of three products. So their salary has to be divided and distributed to all the three of them. How much time is are the supervisors spending on each of these products? It has to first calculate, divide, distribute. Factory rent, take the factory rent amount, divide and distribute it among the products. So it goes on like that. So then as many number of items are there, that many number of times the calculation should take place about dividing and distributing. Let's say that if there are two people and if there are costs which are incurred, so what do we do? These costs are divided and distributed between these two people, based on some basis of apportionment, as to how much did they purchase or did they spend or whatever is that. Then we divide and distribute. So the basis of apportionment should be there. Let's say that two friends go to a restaurant. They have some different kinds of usage. Maybe they consume something else. So depending on what is the usage, the bill is divided between the two people. Okay, two friends. So then we see that the usage part of it is important. Then that becomes the basis of apportionment. Like that, for n number of items, n number of calculations would be there. Every item has to be very carefully taken into consideration. Divide, distribute, allocation, what we call it as. Factory rent based on the space occupied. Power, number of units consumed. um, the cleaning and cleaning supplies and all, how much did they consume? Um, ha, that that will become the basis of apportionment. If it is repairs, how many repairs did they require? So seems quite time consuming process, isn't it? For so many items, that is only just factory. Then again we come to administration overheads, then we come to selling and distribution, traveling expenses, marketing, promotional activities, um, salesman salary, salesman's commission, promotional activities, marketing, advertising. There are so many things. Administration, we have the managers' salaries, employees' salaries, printing, stationery, telephone charges. Okay, the list is endless. Now, when such a thing is there, the traditional cost accounting, what was it doing is, um, instead of doing all the calculation, taking up all the calculations, they depend on um, a predetermined overhead which is calculated. So take that rate and apply it here. Usually the practice, the normal practice of, are you able to understand? I somehow on my mind it's there that you do not know how to do a cost sheet. At least you practice the cost sheet, I can explain you what is activity based costing. Without that, it doesn't sound convincing for me. Are you able to follow? Did you understand cost sheet? Okay. Please, others also please respond. You're able to? Okay, done. So what is done is factory overheads are calculated based on some predetermined overhead. Now, what is that predetermined overhead? Maybe in the past cost sheets, they might have observed that um, this factory overhead as a percentage of some other variable. Normally, the one which is taken as a base is direct labor. So, direct labor hours or direct labor cost or anything related to labor, or some of them depend on Meshnards, some of them depend on prime cost. Okay, the most commonly used rate, the predetermined overhead rate is based on factory overheads based on direct labor. So what's the logic? The logic is, if direct labor in the previous period, some amount would be there. So if this amount, if this represents 100%, then the factory overheads in the previous period, factory overheads also would have re- they would have been incurred, and this amount, now this is converted as a percentage of direct labor. So this is what percentage? Some percentage, let's say that it is 35%. Let's take, for example, let's say it comes out to be as 35%. So then, henceforth, whenever they prepare a cost sheet, instead of doing that calculations or taking up the calculations of dividing and distributing, they straight away um, write the heading as factory overheads. Okay, all the factory overheads in one go, in one simple step, they are calculated as, in the current year, whatever is the direct labor amount, of that 35% will be calculated and it is accounted for. It is simple, in a simple manner. But will it be the same relationship in the current year also? As it is, overheads are not identifiable with anything. They do not change in proportion to how the other costs change. The factory rent, will it change if they produce more number of units? They keep increasing the units. Will the factory rent change? No, it would be the same. As long as they're using that premises, any activity which they take up, factory rent would not change. But direct labor cost will change because it is identifiable. If they make 10 units, 10 tables are made. So 10 into, let's say, 2000, 10 into 2000, 20,000. If they make 1000, 10 into 2000, so that would be the labor cost. But along with that, is the factor rent changing? No, it would not change. So the link about, or the relationship which is established as factory overheads is some percentage of direct labor doesn't make sense. So it is not applicable. It is not suitable in all situations. There are some of the items which are not proportionately which are not related to the item called as labor, and they would not change based on the changes in what take place in labor cost. Let's say that if one product is heavily dependent on machineries, they don't depend on labor hours, or very less labor hours are consumed. In that case, then calculating the amount based on labor hours would be most inappropriate. So these are the disadvantages of traditional costing system. Because they depend on a predetermined overhead, the calculation can result in either the cost, the total cost, what we call it as the total cost, um, can be overcharged or can be undercharged. There is there is no way that the right amount of cost what they have actually incurred would have been accounted. Whatever they incur, ignoring that, whatever they incur, they just go ahead preparing the cost sheet based on the predetermined overhead. And then later on, finally at the end, they just compare how much cost did they account for, what is the actual cost incurred. If there is a difference, they just take up the reconciliation, reconcile it in one go, and then finish it off. So that is the um, procedure what we see here in case of cost sheet. So now what we understand is, when the sales is based on cost price plus profit. That's the equation what we see. Or if we have to put it as what is profit, okay, let's see. Sales is equal to cost price plus profit. If we see that if they end up incurring or accounting for more amount of cost, see, definitely the result of this will be there on sales. Selling price also will be at a higher value. If the cost is undercharged, they have charged or they have accounted for less amount of cost, selling price also would be obviously less. If this is the situation, if this is what happens, in that case, they face certain disadvantages. Both the situations, there is a disadvantage. The first one, if they charge a higher price because cost accounted is higher, selling price is also higher. If selling price is high, the danger is that customers may prefer to buy from their competitors but not from this particular business. Why? Because selling price is high. So when the price rises, the demand falls and it will have a negative impact on the profit which is earned. So the profit would be less because customers are not buying their product. Why are they not buying the product? Selling price is high. Selling price is high because cost accounted is also high. So that's one disadvantage. What if they undercharge, charge the price or absorb the cost? What the term what we use is under absorb the cost. Cost is low, selling price also will definitely be low because cost price plus profit is sales. Sales selling price also will be low. So will they benefit out of that? Sometimes their selling price will not be even sufficient enough to recover their total cost because they are not aware of what exactly is the cost. They are just going ahead with some predetermined overhead rate and assumed costs are accounted. So that also results in a disadvantage. They may not be able to recover all the cost and they may have very less or no profit in certain cases. So that is what we see here. Sales is equal to cost price plus profit. Okay. Now this is, in fact, actually you should have this idea. Um, you should have this idea before we start activity based costing. If you would have done one or two problems, the concept would have been much clearer. But then, nevertheless, let's try to proceed further. So now, absorption costing says that charges overheads. Absorption costing is the traditional costing method where the costs are accounted, the way the costs are accounted, how the overhead costs are accounted. So absorption costing says um, they charge overheads to products based on an hourly absorption rate. If it is labor hours, sometimes mesh hours also. So some predetermined overhead rate is adopted and they charge that. But that has disadvantages, what we have already discussed. There are disadvantages of charging the overhead cost based on some assumptions. The administration, selling and distribution, they are calculated based on the works cost. So they are also not incurred, accounted as they are incurred, but they are also charged based on some basis. So in such situation, because there is either under charging or overcharging of the overhead cost, there is a solution to that, which is the activity based costing. So activity based costing identifies these disadvantages with the traditional costing system. It comes out with the suggestion that overhead costs should not be accounted that way, but they should be accounted based on what are the activities. So there are certain suggestions which are given, steps which are given. The first one says that why are the costs incurred? First thing, what are the activities for which the costs are incurred is step number one. Let's say if it is repair cost. So repairs will be one activity. If they have to move material from one place to another, the material moving cost. If there are inspections taken place, inspection cost. Activities, inspection. So identify all the activities. So whatever activities take place, those activities are first identified. After that, for every activity, there would be a cost driver which is selected. What is cost driver? The basis of apportionment. In simple terms, if we understand what is cost driver is, based on the usage, um, the the basis the basis of apportionment, the basis which is considered for dividing and distributing the overhead cost is the basis of apportionment. So that is what. So um, for example, repairs. We started with repairs. So repairs, if we talk about repairs as an activity, how many repairs were required by each product will become the um, basis of apportionment. Let's say product A required 2 repairs during that period, product B 3 repairs, product C required only 1 repair. So the ratio in which they are apportioned is 2 is to 3 is to 1. So the total cost of repairs will be distributed in the ratio of 2 is to 3 is to 1 based on the usage of repairs. So that is called as the cost driver. Step number 1 is activity should be identified. Step number 2, cost driver should be identified. Appropriate cost driver. We cannot select anything as cost driver, but the one which is suitable only should be selected. Then all the costs which are incurred during the period are collected into a cost pool. Collect costs into pools based on their activities. That is, during that period, every time any cost is incurred based on that activity. So every time repair cost is incurred, pool it up, and then accumulate the cost. If it is inspection, every time inspection takes place, the cost incurred has to be pooled up. So that is collect costs into cost pools. Then third, the last step will be to divide and distribute the costs which are pooled up here in the cost pools based on the basis of apportionment and allocate that cost. So this is the right way of doing that based on the consumption. It is not just based on some assumption that the overhead costs are charged, but this is based on the right usage of that particular activity. So that is how costs are pooled up. The rate is calculated, either they are just distributed in the ratio, that is 2 is to 3 is to 4 or something like that, or a rate is calculated and that rate is applied every time the amount of cost has to be allocated. So the cost drive for every overhead item, one rate will be calculated. As many number of overheads are there, that many number of overhead rates will be calculated. Traditional costing, with one or very few overhead rates, the total costs are allocated. But here, as many number of overheads are incurred, that many number of overhead rates would be calculated under ABC. See, why are traditional overhead absorption rates less reliable? So if we look into that, why are traditional overhead absorption rates less reliable? See, of late now the activities are not very simple. They are complex operations. They are complex activities. So there is increased complexity of operations. That's one thing. There is increased complexity of operations which are carried out. It is not simple that we can easily identify and divide and distribute. The activities are much complicated um, because of technology, automation, all those things. We do not see that they can be very simply and easily distributed. Okay, that is one reason. Increased percentage of overhead costs. So more amount of overhead costs are incurred of late. Then the dependence on labor has reduced because the automation, the dependence on technology, machines, systems, all these things has increased. So depending on for the traditional overhead absorption rate, depending on labor hours is not relevant in this particular scenario because the dependence on labor has reduced significance of labor. Therefore, the traditional overhead absorption rates are less reliable. Then less volume related costs. So one way in which they can be calculated is based on the volume, the number of units of output which is produced. So that dependence also has reduced. Then The advantages are, for the moment, let's put it aside. We'll go to the examination kit, take up a question, and then solve it. We'll see the difference between the traditional costing and the activity-based costing. Come back to this particular PPT and discuss about what are the advantages and disadvantages once. I'll put you to the examination kit. So the examination kit has questions based on simple questions are also there. Uh, but we will select one question wherein we can take up the comparison between the traditional costing and the activity based costing. One set of data, let's take it and then apply it. Here we see on the screen question number 36. The same set of, I'm just putting you through this one. Question number 36 talks about traditional costing. There are two products, alpha and beta. I will take you through in detail about everything. Alpha and beta, ABC company. Then they want to calculate what is the traditional method of overhead absorption based on labor hours. The same set of data, just look into that. The same set of data, we also have it in question number 38. But this is an extension, traditional method of overhead absorption based on labor hours. What is the overhead cost for product beta? There it was product alpha. Now here it is product beta. The same set of data, the same set of data is also spread into 20, 39. 39. Now they have moved to ABC. 39 talks about what is the overhead absorption rate for alpha. Then we see another bit wherein it is asked for beta. So let's select one set of data, use it for both traditional costing and the activity based costing. Find out what is the cost per unit of each of these products. So I'm just copying this one. I'll put it in on an Excel file, in an Excel file, and then I hope you are able to see the screen here. Excel file. Are you able to see Excel file here? Okay, done. Um, so we will take up both of them. That is the traditional costing method and also the activity-based costing. I just copied here, and this is question number 36. Let's solve this one. The first set of information is about the traditional costing method. Traditional costing method of overhead absorption rate based on labor hours. How many labor hours per use? Let's read the question first. Let's go through the question and then attempt to answer this one. The ABC company manufactures two products, product alpha and product beta. Both are produced in a very labor intense environment and use similar processes. Alpha and beta differ by volume. Beta is a high volume product, while alpha is a low volume product. Details of product inputs, outputs, and the costs of activities are as follows. There are two products, alpha, beta. Direct labor hours per unit is given, and the output is also given. Number of purchase orders, number of setups. Fixed overhead costs amount to 420,000. So this 420,000, the overhead cost which is incurred, later on can be identified, incurred for three different activities. But right now we are only doing the traditional costing method. So let's not get into those details. First, we have to understand that how would this 420,000 would be allocated to alpha and beta. So that is what has to be now looked into. 420,000. What is that they are following? They are calculating this or apportioning this cost based on labor hours. They are dividing and distributing based on the labor hours. So what should we know? We should know how many total labor hours were used by alpha and how many hours were used by beta. If that is known, if we can find out that part of it, then we can divide and distribute between alpha and beta the cost. Let's start. The method what we are following is traditional costing. The products are alpha, then we have beta. Direct labor hours per unit is given. Then we have annual output. See, for every single unit, what is the requirement of labor hours for every one unit? 5 hours are required. But the output, for the total output, if the total output is considered, total direct labor hours. So let's find out what are total direct labor hours. Five, five, and output is given as 1,200 and 12,000. So how many hours would be required? The total labor hours which are required is 66,000. Now, how to calculate the overhead rate? The overhead rate will be the total amount of overhead cost 420,000 divided by the total number of labor hours, which is 66,000. So let's calculate overhead absorption rate. the overhead rate is at the rate of 6.36 per labor hour. So now if we have to charge the overhead cost has to be charged to alpha and beta. So let's see. Um, Overhead cost allocated to the products. If that is the case, per hour rate is given as 6.36. So how many hours would require 1200 for alpha and 12,000 for beta? So we can take that is equal to 1200 hours into rate per hour. Similarly, we have it as 12,000 hours into rate per hour. So we know what is the total amount of overhead cost which is incurred. Sorry, the number of hours are 6,000. Then here it is. Okay. So 420,000 is allocated between alpha and beta. The amount which is allocated, round it off, we see 38,182 and 381,880. So in this manner it is allocated. What if we depend on activity based costing? So let's continue here. Question number 38 talks about see, I brought question number 38 also here onto this to this file. What is asked in question number 38? 38 says, using a traditional method of overhead absorption based on labor hours, what is the overhead cost per unit? So already we have allocated the cost. Now we need to know what is cost per unit. So this part I will also paste it there so that it becomes easy for us to refer. We are asked to calculate what is the overhead cost per unit. Per unit, these costs divided by the number of units gives us what is cost per unit. So in one step, let's finish this one. Okay. So we got this one as 31.82. 31.82 is overhead cost per unit. Um, the same set of data, what is the ABC method asking for? So I'll get the question here, question number 39. Question number 39, same set of data. We see using activity based costing as the method of overhead absorption. What is the overhead cost per unit for each unit of product alpha? Alpha and beta, both of them will take it up. In case of traditional costing method, only one overhead rate is calculated, and that was sufficient. That was sufficient to charge the overhead amount to products. But activity based costing suggests that first identify the number of activities which take place. How many activities are there? Here, if we look into that, there are three different activities. One is volume related, another one is purchasing related, another one is setup related. So there are three activities. Just have a look at the steps in ABC. First, identify the activities, which is already given in this question. We have what are the activities. There are three different activities. After that, important thing is we have to identify the cost drivers. How would these items be allocated to the products? The basis of apportionment of the activity cost. Then accumulate the cost, collect the cost into cost pools. But that is also given to us in the question. Then finally charging the overheads to the products. So let's get back to the Excel sheet. We know what are the activities. We also know what are the amounts. So here we see 100,000, then 145,000, then we see 175,000. So all three of them are there. The activities are there. Then we see the amounts are there, but we do not know what is the cost driver. So that part, let's take it up. What are the cost drivers for each of them? What is the cost driver is what we have to identify. First one talks about volume related. So something about the activity, volume related, the activity of the production or the capacity, something like that. It goes with that. Okay, so anything related to that. So if to produce that particular volume, now from this set of information, we see that the direct labor hours is the only suitable thing, volume related. How many hours were required? So the total number of hours required can be taken up as a basis. Then we have purchasing related. So there is purchase orders here. Number of purchase orders are given for purchasing related. So that can be taken as the basis of apportionment. Finally, setup related. So number of setups can be taken as the basis of apportionment. So that part we have identified. So what should we do? First, calculate the overhead rates. How many overheads are there? Three. So calculate three overhead rates. First one is about volume related. Volume related overhead rate. What's the total cost? Volume related 100,000. The total direct labor hours. See, of course, we have calculated in the previous set. So we see that the total direct labor hours are 66,000. Of course, anyway, I will bring that table here below also. So the total direct labor hours are 66,000. So we know that part. Let's write this one. So how much is that? So that's 1.515 per labor hour. Next one, purchasing related. cost is 145,000. Cost is 145,000 divided by purchase orders. The number of purchase orders total is 160. Do you see that here? 160. So divided by 160 gives us the overhead rate for purchasing related costs. The third one is setup related. Amount is 175,000 divided by 100. Okay. So this is 1.51 per labor hour. Then this is per purchase order. And this is per setup. Now it's the time for allocating the cost. There are three different costs. So three different items have to be allocated to the products, alpha and beta. See, either we put it in this particular horizontal fashion or move it into a vertical fashion, either ways it is fine. So since we have followed a format there in the traditional costing, we can continue with this one. One second. Okay. See, three items are there, so three costs have to be allocated. So let's start with the first one. The first one is volume related overheads. So let's we will also bring the details here. We have purchase orders, number of purchase orders. Then we have number of setups. Okay. If we are talking about volume related, it will be based on direct labor hours is what we have discussed already. Then What's the usage? How many hours per alpha? 6,000. Into what is the rate per unit? 1.515. Okay. So how much is the cost which is allocated? Just check that. Then we have after volume related, then we have purchasing related. Purchasing related will be number of purchase orders into rate per purchase order. After purchasing related, we have setup related. Number of setups into the rate per setup. Okay. So now we see that the costs are allocated for each of these activities for both the products alpha and beta. So let's add them up. How much is the overheads cost which are allocated? So the costs which are allocated is given overhead costs allocated to the products. Then we need to find out what is cost per unit also. So I am writing it here in the next column. Overhead cost per unit. The overhead cost amount which is charged divided by the number of units of each of these products. Okay, so this is what we see. Now the question we will discuss about here is on a comparative note we'll discuss. So what is the overhead rate as per, we see first is traditional costing. As per traditional costing, what is it? And as per ABC, what is it? For alpha and then for beta. According to anyway, ABC is here. Let's put it here 122.55. Then we have it as 22.75. These are the rates. Do you see that? Then comes the traditional costing. We've also done the traditional costing. For both of them, we got it as 31.82. You see that 31.82. So let's write it here 31.82 Here also 31.82. What do we see that? But the actual cost should be 122 um, per unit. The overhead cost per unit. The actual amount should be according to the usage. According to the usage, it is coming out to be as 122. How much did they charge in the traditional costing system? They have charged only 31.82. So that's under absorption. This is basically under absorption. So what is the disadvantage? If they charge less amount, under absorption will result in underpricing the products. The price will not be sufficient enough to recover their cost. So that's major disadvantage here. Then beta should have been only 22.75, but they have ended up charging 31.82. So over and above 31.82, their selling price also definitely will be higher. This will affect the demand. So this also has a disadvantage. Both of them have disadvantages associated with that. So we see that overall, we see that the traditional costing method was not taking care of this aspect, and that they were going with the convenient method of charging the overheads. So either that is resulting in under absorption or over absorption. So let's just see what are the advantages and disadvantages, discuss them. Advantages of ABC: they're more realistic costs. There's better insights into cost drivers, resulting in better cost control. Particularly useful where overhead costs are a significant portion of total cost. See, earlier the portion of overhead costs which were not identified was very less because the nature of work in an organization was much simple. So simple work. So for each product, it was separately incurred. But now we have complex uh, activities. See, initially the same process takes place for the products. Then they are separated. Then costs are incurred. Then the activities which are required are also on a much complex level. So charging the overhead cost to products has become a very big task, and the disadvantages which are associated with wrong charging are also will affect the business. Therefore, we have to adopt to a method which helps in charging the cost in the right manner. Now the overhead costs are much larger in the total cost. The percentage of overhead cost has increased. So one mistake with the allocation of overhead cost will affect the business very drastically. Therefore, it is important that the overhead costs are appropriately allocated. Then ABC recognizes that overhead costs are not all related to production and sales volume. See, the question what we have seen, there was to set up the machine, then purchasing related. They are not connected to only the production part of it. Volume, production. So that is not always connected to production and sales volume. There are certain other activities also. So appropriate basis of allocation should be taken into consideration. Then next one says that ABC can be applied to all overhead costs, not just production overheads. ABC can be used just as easily in service costing as in product costing. So it's not only for production but also can be used in service industries. Criticism of ABC. One important thing is it's time taking. It's a very complex procedure, time taking. Somebody has to be involved in taking up these things, accounting for that. So it is costly, it is time taking, but whereas traditional costing is simple, easy to calculate and then account for that. But ABC, it is impossible to allocate all overhead costs to specific activities. Why? Every item has to be looked at, and what is the cost driver has to be looked into. Activity, cost driver, allocation, all that should go in step by step. In this process, if they choose a wrong cost driver, unrelated cost driver, see, it is identifying for everything is a time taking and it is a difficult task also. Appropriately, it should be allocated based on the usage. Then, if they make a mistake in identifying the cost driver, the rest of it also would go wrong. Then ABC can be more complex to explain to the stakeholders of the costing exercise. So there are non financial professionals also in the organization, the top management or any level. We see that there are certain non accounting, non finance related professionals also. They do not understand the intricacies of this particular system. The benefits obtained from ABC might not justify the cost. So, yesterday also we've discussed cost benefit analysis. Not every method is suitable for every organization. If the benefit which is derived out of ABC, if it does not exceed the cost which is incurred, it's absolutely of no use. So rather they take it up doing it manually. The implication of ABC. What is the implication? It is useful in pricing. More realistic cost, improve cost plus pricing. So the right amount of cost will also help in deciding what is the selling price per unit. The costs are right, the selling price also would be right. Right, the implication of the, the implication would be in the right selling price. Sales strategy, more realistic margins. More realistic margins can help focus sales strategy. Then we see decision making. For example, research and development can be directed at products with better margins. So if they allocate the cost appropriately, in such situation, um, the the selling price can be decided properly. Then there are certain costs which are incurred in the initial stage, that is the research and development, product designing. These are the costs which are incurred in the initial stages. So it says that research and development can be directed at products with better margins. So now these initial costs also have to be allocated to the products. So when ABC is taken up, the right quantity or the right amount of cost can be charged to each of the products appropriately. So that is another thing. So these are the implications of ABC. Fine. Um, Very first time you're learning ABC without having a idea about how a cost sheet looks like, what is the practice of a cost sheet. You have made an attempt to understand the cost sheet, then the activity based costing, all of them. Um, from your end, you need to practice a lot. See, our training session is only for 20 hours, so I cannot spend anything more than this on ABC. Of course, I would be there for your help with any doubt in future. Also, we are always available there. Anyone, see, the faculty are always available. But I think this would better sink into your mind after you work out few questions from cost sheet, whichever semester you have cost accounting, take it up, work it out, and then check how this works out. Then take up the exam practice kit, take up few questions, and then work out that. ABC would be also repeated in APM, but then there we would not be spending time on the numerical part of it, only the concept part of it. So any practice related to ABC, you have to finish it here. So it's your responsibility to work out questions from the examination kit and understand what is that concept all about. Fine. So in the college also, college level syllabus also, somewhere you would be coming across activity based costing, cost accounting paper somewhere. Please work out the questions there also. Okay, what do you have next after 11 o'clock? You have another class? The morning there was a technical difficulty. I was unable to log in into that. So I could not start the class right at 9 o'clock. Today, I think all the students, all 22 of them joined. Is that so? Niranjana, is that so? All of them are there or any absences?
Yes, ma'am. All are present today.
Any doubts what you have learned in this particular thing? The question what we have practiced, any doubts? Okay, then let's end the class here. We wind up. Would like to say something, Jeffrey?